Hi there. I'm Smita Murthy, Managing Partner at Opencliff Partners. We're a product advisory and consulting firm. We provide product advisory and enable value creation throughout the product lifecycle for technology and tech-enabled businesses. We partner with investors and boards, founders and CEOs, product leaders, and individuals, meeting them where they're at in the value creation process. This podcast series focuses on cross-functional perspectives on what it takes to build successful products across domains and industries. I interview leaders from various functions with whom I've worked with to build and launch great products and the lessons we learned along the way. Today, I'm super excited to welcome and host Barry Pellas. Barry and I worked together at Oracle Health. He was my boss. We had so much fun navigating all of that. We'll talk more about that as we go through our conversation. But let me first introduce you to Barry. Barry is a seasoned technology executive with over 20 years of experience driving innovation and digital transformation. At Oracle Health and AI, he led the development of the next generation consumer health systems and played a pivotal role in Oracle's Cerner integration, which was a big integration. We'll talk about that too. Previously, as CTO at Primerica, Barry modernized IT operations, achieving faster software delivery and spearheading the largest acquisition in the company's history. Barry's leadership extends to global roles at Globant, PointSource, and IBM, where he developed AI strategies, enhanced enterprise architectures, and drove cloud adoption. A Penn State grad with extensive patent contributions, Barry is recognized for his expertise in aligning technology and business goals, fostering innovation, and delivering impactful solutions. And I can tell you firsthand, Barry loves to get his hands dirty, no matter how high he rises in the corporate ladder. So I'm so excited to have you here, Barry. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Smitha. I'm really, really excited to be here and talk about this.
Awesome. So why don't we kind of warm the session up? Why don't you tell us a fun fact about you?
See, fun fact. Well, I got to say, just technology-wise, I've recently taken a new job as CTO at Procure Analytics here in Atlanta, and I went ahead and got a self-driving car and been doing full self-driving with it. I have not even touched the wheel for the entire couple of weeks that I've been there to drive into Atlanta, to drive back. It's been really, really nice. So I get to sit back and I listen to Harry Potter on audiobooks and disappear for a little while. So it's just very, very impressive. So just being a chance to do that. So that's really great. And then just about me personally, I have two amazing children, 13 and 12, Lyra and Landon, my kids, and an amazing wife, Jessica. She's over donating her time to our school where they both participate in the band at Beaufort High School. And yeah, I think that my biggest life lesson is that you really can't get too far away from the family whenever you're doing this stuff. So I've been very blessed to be able to have the career that I've had, but also be able to be dad at times.
Yeah, no, that's the most important thing.
Sure.
Obviously, we'll talk tech and product here, but that's my experience. I mean, that's the most important thing. That's something that's always there for you. So it requires nurturing and caring.
For sure.
Jobs come and go.
Right.
So,
yep.
Anyway, all right. So let's talk about your role and function when we work together.
Sure.
And what's the one thing you remember most about our interaction?
Yeah. So, well, we were part of Oracle Health whenever Oracle Health wasn't a thing. So at least for me personally, I was hired the day before the acquisition was finalized. So that was a big surprise, and looking back on it through the interview process and everything else, should have known, but they couldn't obviously say anything. So that was a big surprise. And then, just getting from the ground up of changing that entire area from a pandemic response team into, really the bleeding edge of consumer healthcare products for Oracle. And whenever I brought you on, that's exactly what we needed to focus on, right? So we had this series of legacy systems and things that we had done in the pandemic. We wanted to turn them into a product set, and then we had this massive integration to work with through Cerner, and how to manage and juggle all of those things. Well, that was me and you just in the thick of it, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the parts that I remember, and very fondly, by the way. It was really, really fun, and just great experience. The people at Cerner were amazing, very, very knowledgeable, and of course, being able to just say, okay, you're going to lead the first couple of products was, an opportunity you're not going to get very many times in your life.
No, and it's so interesting that that's kind of what you talked about, because that's my memory of when we were at Oracle Health together, where it's very rare for a product person, for a product manager, to get the opportunity to build a whole portfolio of new products.
Mm-hmm.
We literally had no one else's CRAP to clean up. So
Yep.
we got to start from the beginning,
Yep.
right? And we got to define the vision, define the strategy, define the roadmaps, execute on those roadmaps, define the architecture. I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you how many times in my career we kind of go in there, the best laid plans, and the architecture is so antiquated that it really can support the vision, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I know you got to do a lot of that too, because like we said, you like to get involved and
For
get
sure.
very hands-on. So
Better or worse, I guess. Yeah, I definitely like to.
I personally think that was great, because the engineering leadership needed that guidance. We didn't, it was very surprising to me that we didn't actually have an architect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We never had an architect. We were building so many products, and we had this vision of a platform-based strategy. I remember my little block diagrams where we had like a reporting layer, a compliance layer, and all these verticalized solutions.
Yep.
That's a marketecture.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the architecture, right?
Yep.
So I think it was super important that we had that. So
Yeah, agreed. And I think that being able to create this kind of block of shared services for multiple products, and knowing that it wasn't just the consumer space that was going to use the base of that platform, it was going to be the replacement ERP, or the replacement software for the hospitals and things like that, right? So, I mean, whenever we were thinking about, the next generation EMR, we knew that we had to make this in a way that it could be scaled throughout that process as well. Even though we weren't working on the EMR, right? We were still interacting with it quite a bit as the consumer space. But we also knew that we had to keep things separate, right? We had to make sure that while we had this consumer platform, we might not always be on that same EMR, right? We might have to integrate with multiple of them, or we might have to have, hospitals go through acquisitions just like everybody else. And as that hospital system is growing, they're going to bring in additional EMRs that we have to integrate with. So really thinking ahead to all of those different interactions with unknown systems, and the fact that it was worldwide. I mean, don't forget that, right? The compliance part of it was, really a big job. That was one of the coolest challenges by far that we faced there, for sure.
Actually, that's a perfect segue to a question I was going to ask you, which is, you can either use the same example or some other example. What's the coolest product you built in your career? Because you've been at traditional companies, you've been a consultant, you've done a whole bunch of different things. So, what's the coolest product you built, and why is it your favorite?
I gotta say, the coolest thing that we've ever built in my career, and my team was an exceptional at Point Source, so I'd have to give them the shout out, is the LabCorp solutions.
Mm.
So, and we still see them today. So if you walk into a LabCorp facility, we worked a lot on the phlebotomist software for the front desk. We worked on the kiosk that stands there, so the LabCorp kiosk with the iPad where you can check in, and you can do so with this kind of touch-free put your license and your insurance card down and go through this little thing. And it was cool because of the scope, for one, that it touched the back office, the front office, payment processing, also the kiosks and things like that. But it also was their first foray into cloud. So it was we did a lot of work with AWS on that project, and it was just the scope was very, very interesting. And nothing makes me more proud than whenever somebody comes across one of our kiosks and take a picture and pops it up on LinkedIn, because I think wow, that project was just
I touched that. Yeah.
yeah. So that was very cool. And I guess a close second would have to be my time working at with soccer.com. So right around the World Cup, we got to launch the FIFA website through soccer.com, as well as update soccer.com. And that was, one of those nights where you're sitting there at 11 p.m. to flip the switch to go to production, and you're terrified. But it all worked out. And that was just a really cool, experience to go through.
Yep. So I want to actually go back to the example you were giving when we were at Oracle Health. And we don't have to get into any details that we shouldn't be talking about, but at a general level, when we're looking at these massive integrations with products, right? And in this case, it was through an acquisition. Even for a company as large as Oracle, this was a huge bite that we took. It was a $28 billion acquisition of Sarnar. Tell me, from an architecture perspective, when we think of integrations, like people say, yeah, we're integrated. Like, there's different kinds of integrations. There's just surface level lipstick, but there's sometimes the pig underneath it. It can be Frankenstein-like, or it can be true integration, which is at an API level, code level. So that way, if you pull one string, the rest of it doesn't fall apart. So with that in mind, tell me, when you talked about the interoperability, let's talk about the headless APIs we were working on. That really the intention was, like you were saying, we could work with our EHR, or with potentially in the future with other EHRs, and truly be an interoperable system. So tell me about that experience. What are your recommendations on things to keep in mind when someone's embarking on something like that?
Well, I think I'll start by just talking about the one thing that I think that above all that we got right was, surprisingly, being able to keep the legacy systems running side by side of our own solutions. So you imagine we're integrating all of this hospital software and the urgent care clinics and all this stuff. We're integrating all that, and they have operations, right? They do things a certain way, and you can't just disrupt that. You can't just show up one day and say, here's your new portal, right? Now figure it out. Or here's your new, front desk software, figure it out. You have to actually transition them. We can't just turn the entire United States over to a new system overnight. So I think that our way of looking at it from a headless API standpoint, that everything you could do through our patient portal and our mobile app and everything, that was critical, because then it will set us up for being able to consume those services all throughout the enterprise. But also it allowed us to do a lot of large scale automation to test to make sure it worked. And that was a key part of it, because we needed to be able to do some parts of our workflow in the old software for an amount of time while the transition was happening. So being able to work in a legacy system and bring online the new one without major disruption, that is, the critical part of integration to me, because all those old systems are so relied upon and so understood by all the people involved that if I think if we didn't do it the way that I just described it, I don't know that we would have been successful in launching those products, right? Or even getting any adoption at all, right? With the way that it worked. So the headless APIs were great. I also loved the way that we did componentization around, we really wanted to make sure that we had services around the different parts of the patient portal. It wasn't just, here's all the services for portal. It was, well, you might have to help me out with everything, but it was, sending secure messages. It was, getting your test results. It was getting your visit summaries. There's probably 20 different,
A
flavors
lot of stuff.
of
Yeah.
portals.
So for me, it was sort of like deja vu because I went back 20 years when we were doing that. Because we used to, like when I was at CA Technologies, we used to call them common services. We thought we were so cool
Mhm.
because we were like, oh, we have common services. And you need common services for any product that you buy. And lo and behold, we're back to the tried and true. These are really great software development practices.
Yep.
It just comes
Agreed.
down to that.
Yeah.
So the
100.
modularization and the interoperability. And I think on the topic of running the legacy system while you're introducing new things, a key piece of that is that change management.
Yeah. Great
Because
point.
if you remember, like when we went and visited all these hospitals and doctors, they were like, I have to take care of this patient in the ICU,
Yeah.
right? And if your system goes down, or if you give me a new system where I don't know where to input something, it
Mhm.
just like brings everything to a crashing halt.
Yep.
So I think that change management is super critical. So thank you for sharing that. That was a great example. So speaking of success of products,
Mhm.
what are the typical metrics in your mind that one should track to determine if a product was actually successful?
Sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, well, in our world, right, we would, really rely on the users to, tell us how successful it is. Of course, there's plenty of business development people out there to say, well, you got to make a pile of money, right? But at least from our standpoint, we need to delight our users and we need to make sure that people are interacting with it. And we can actually look at really key metrics of our workflows and build out KPIs that are associated with that. In my current role at Procure Analytics, this is, very true. So it's group purchasing, right? So there's a lot of workflow where, let's say we send off a purchase order and then the supplier doesn't ever get back to us or doesn't confirm that they received the invoice. So we have to work that in a queue. We can, we have two parties in the user, right? We have the supplier, we can log into the website and, actually take action, pull the invoice. And we also have the people on the PA team that are actively working the queue trying to get this through. So metrics on both sides are equally important, your internal facing users as well as your external. So we we build up this criteria, if you will, of what would make a successful, in our case, patient portal, right? Or front office software we also worked on. And what did we do? We went out and, like you said, we talked to the doctors, we talked to the people managing the hospitals and said, okay, look, tell us everything, good, bad, and ugly, just tell us it all, we'll take it down. And then you build out the measurements from that, right? And then you say, okay, well, how many people are logging into the portal, how easy is it to sign up. One of the ones that I really think we did well on was tracking somebody as they go through registration and if they abandon. Like what's our abandonment rate, right? So maybe our workflow for registration is just too long. Maybe it's too long, maybe it's too complicated, and we need to shorten that. So we had a lot of conversations like that, and I think that those are the kind of metrics that really matter. I think that as long as we pay attention to how the users are interacting and we're getting their numbers up, the money comes along, in the end.
I think you're highlighting the most important thing in product, which is that customer obsession.
Yeah.
Um, our whole purpose for the internal audience is to be the voice of the customer and the voice of the market. And if we're building product that someone's willing to buy and use and actually make their lives better, that's why they're willing to pay for it. Then that's the whole product management and product in a nutshell, right? I think many people just forget that. And even for me, one of my recent peeves has been like life sciences companies, health tech everyone wants to improve patient outcomes. And
Mm-hmm.
somewhere along the way, they forget the patient.
Right. Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, so I think just that driving that point home, especially if you're in life sciences or health tech, at the end of the day, we're all in business so that we improve patient outcomes. So let's just not forget that end user or that end outcome that we're going for.
Mm-hmm.
So well said. I just remember we were in the University of Virginia Medical, the hospital associated with that. And I was shocked that the doctors let us go through the ICU And
Mhm.
we actually went through the NICU, and I'm like, am I allowed to go in here? They just had us all masked up and we wore the booties on top of our shoes.
Mhm.
But we actually went through that. And I think I'll never forget that just because I've never had to go through it.
Mhm.
And secondly, it shows how much of an impact our work has.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And um, also, what you're saying is so important because it's it's not just a firsthand experience. Of course, you're going to take away the the human side of that, right?
Yeah.
Yourself, and you're going to grow from there. But it's also the willingness of these hospital systems to help us create great products so that
Yeah.
we can have better patient outcomes. I
Yeah.
thought that was striking.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to help. You know, when we were on the phone with different county representatives and things like that, all they were talking about is we just want to help do this better. When we were working with the VA, they were like they cared about the vets. That's all they cared about, right? Was they were
Yeah.
willing to tell us all about it, right? And I think that going through that yourself, that's
Yeah.
a powerful moment that you won't forget, like you said. And it also then just drives home the fact that it's not even just us that are so passionate about this. The doctors, nurses, the staff, they
Absolutely.
want it just as much, if not more.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So I know we did some really cool stuff at Oracle, but tell me about a time when you influenced the direction of a product that resulted in better outcomes.
Sure. I think that this one would probably be at least on a technology side of things, right? Is that everything is very database centric, across the organization, and having that concept of you know knowing that um, that yes, we just bought this EMR and it's obviously going to be the first class citizen. It's not the only one, and in fact, it's not the largest one in the U.S. either, right?
Right.
So I feel like the decision to make an agnostic patient experience was a critical one for me, and I think that that was the right call ultimately because we wanted to build the best possible patient experience, regardless of what the backend system was.
Right.
And I got to give the leadership kudos on that, right? Of even letting us do that, especially right after this $28 billion purchase, they had the forward thinking just to say, okay, well, actually, this could really help, you know,
Yeah.
and help engagement all across the system. So I think that that's a good one because to me, most people probably would have just said, look, we spent all this money on this EMR, and you're just going to attach a patient portal to it, right? But we weren't forced into that bubble, and I think that was a really smart decision.
That's great. I completely agree. I think, for me, when I think about those experiences, it was as promised to us new people to Oracle,
Hmm.
where we had somewhat of a blank check to kind of create this whole division,
Yeah.
which also, by the way, we don't get too many opportunities to do.
No, I don't
Um,
know that I'll ever have another opportunity like that.
yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I still wish we had a little bit more of that blank check for some of the things we wanted to do, but um, that and plus that complete trust in the people that they had hired to
Hmm.
make the right decisions. Of course, we went through a lot of governance. Of course, there were
Yeah.
20 people checking and making sure they understood what we were doing. But I think that really speaks volumes to how we did that over
Yeah.
there.
And
Yeah,
how accessible the people with the institutional knowledge from Cerner were. You know,
absolutely.
um, I could easily message somebody on the team and they would help me almost immediately because they didn't want us making the same mistakes they had made. They'd learned so much over the years. They were really really accessible, and I think that um, that merging of such large organization and so much institutional knowledge, it's another thing we're not going to get a lot of chances to do in our
No,
career, right? So
no.
Oracle certainly gave us a lot of firsts,
Yeah,
and I think that we were able to harness the institutional knowledge and the people that have been there, but also bring in the fresh faces that were specifically designing for this cloud experience in OCI. So that mix was pretty special.
absolutely. But actually brings me to a very special topic. And I think, you're uniquely positioned to answer that, and that is leadership in chaos.
Hmm.
Because God knows you and I faced enough of that.
Certainly, sure. Sure.
So, but I think for anyone on this journey, be it in a technology career path, in a product career path, or any function, as you grow in your career, I think there are a few things that are common themes that you have to deal with.
Hmm.
One is I have other special topics, but I picked this one for our conversation. But one is not everything. If everything was working perfectly well, you wouldn't have your job.
Right.
They brought you in to fix a problem or to set something up that never existed.
Hmm.
So, some amount of chaos, some amount of resistance, some amount of why should we do this a different way is to be expected, especially as you're growing.
Yeah.
So that topic of leadership in chaos, tell me I know your approach, but tell our audience your approach. What worked, what didn't work, just some insights on that.
Yeah, and for a while there, we weren't really sure exactly what we were going to build, right? How much of the pandemic software could we reuse? Any of it? We had several false starts. I think that as a leader, you want to stay calm and you want to say, hey, understand there is a little bit of chaos going on, and that's okay. But once we get our feet underneath us, we're going to run, and we ran. I mean, we built those products in 9 months.
Yeah.
It's incredible, right? So the speed at which we did that for a large organization, that's pretty unprecedented. So I think it's just you got to have a cool head and you got to be honest. Look, when we go into a town hall and we made a big pivot, you better say something about it, right? You better explain that to your employees so they can stay with you. And I think we did a good job of that.
Yeah.
And I think that also, you and I are both empathetic leaders, and I think that's really critical, especially in chaos, right? Because if you're just going to, hang out on an ivory tower and do mandates and dictates to everybody, and you have to constantly restart, they're not going to trust you, right? But in the end, we're all humans. We're all doing a job, regardless of our position. And if someone wants to talk to you, we should be available and we should listen to them. And there's a lot of really great input that we got from our product team that either one of us that would have expected or thought about, or different use cases and things like that. So yeah, I think that it's a cool head. Cool heads prevail, and I think that also just letting your team know that we're in it too. You're experiencing it. We're experiencing it. I get it. But we have a mission, and it's really important.
I think that's super important what you said, that last part. I mean, I agree with everything that you said, but I actually use this example in a podcast where I was a guest about how do you influence your team. And I think a huge part, almost all of product management is influencing people who don't report to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think especially for your own team, to motivate them, for them to trust you, for them to kind of stick with you as you're going through chaos, that transparency and kind of saying, hey, I'm in it with you,
Yeah.
right? I'm not removed from this, is super critical.
Mm-hmm.
So that way they feel like, okay, so I'm not the only one feeling confused.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not alone in this. And there's light at the end of the tunnel, and this is a necessary growing up we need to go through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I don't know is an acceptable answer, right? At any
yeah,
level of leadership. But you just have to take those I don't knows and make them actionable, right? So how do you get to the point where you do know, okay, well, once the chaos settles down, you communicate and you over communicate, and then you communicate some more, right?
yeah,
So I think we did, a good job with that. And yeah, there's chaos everywhere. Every role, every job has this. But you and I were also level one engineers. We were,
yeah,
we grew up through this thing, and we've been, in their positions before. So
absolutely.
again, having a little bit of empathy for something you've gone through, I think goes a long way in leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Having gone through that, for me, it's amazing. The relationships, they're so tight.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, many people I've reached out to, fast forward all like a few years, I can still have a copy. We pick up where we left off, and we're
Oh
having this
yeah.
conversation. So it's, I think that's the investment you do
Mm-hmm.
as a leader, with your team, with your peers, with your bosses, and super super important. I want to spend some time, given that you have a long history with AI,
Yeah.
and having been a practitioner. I generally ask my guests, how is AI changing what you do? I think that's too mild a question for you. So tell me, in the last several years, I mean, AI's been around a long time,
Mm-hmm.
right? It didn't probably have the hype, or the practical application that it has today. But computer vision's been there for a while.
Yeah.
Neural networking has been there for a while. I'm not going to timestamp myself, but I remember taking that course in college.
Right.
So that said, tell me over the years how this has changed, how it is helping, and especially in your current role, and even when we were in your prior roles, you've talked about AI a fair bit. Tell me how that's impacting, enhancing, changing what you do, how
Yeah.
we build products.
Yeah, I think it certainly has been a lot more recently, right? So I think it's just gone almost vertical at this point, So save the best for last of at least what I'm doing now. But it used to be just simple automation as well, right? I mean, we would
Yeah.
say that these were intelligent automation, business process automation, or digital process automation, and that was AI, right, for a while. And then, like you said, using bots or something like that to perform tasks, that was AI. And eventually LLMs become the norm, and we start to look into those. But I think that at least from our standpoint, whenever we think about healthcare, and we were doing this exercise of you know what is the best way to get a patient outcome that you need, and you can't be prescriptive. You can't like tell somebody to take a certain drug from a computer, right? It's got to come from a doctor. So what can you do? And that concept that we built out on the next best actions, I thought was really great.
Yeah.
Of okay, humans have gaps in care. You might miss your physical. You might be due for a flu shot. You might be due for an eye checkup. Whatever it is, right? If you can get connected to all of those systems, and you can start to intelligently, based on your history, against demographics, against where you live, whatever, what hospital systems are close to you, and you can start to use that intelligence to hone engagement, and then in that engagement improves the patient outcomes, because now they know, oh well, I have 3 things to check off my list. And it's not just I log in and see a page full of to-dos because I'm never going to do them. I'm just going to click the X and bam. But if it's something like, okay, even it's just, hey, you got a message or whatever, right? You're really trying to farm engagement and get that habit down. So I think that was one of the coolest experiences, and especially with Oracle, the chatbots and things that came into there, using the LLMs, being able to look and search for my history, and ask specific questions about like an upcoming procedure that was recommended. Just the educational aspect was really really cool, and now in my current role, really using real machine learning, actual models that have been trained 80/20, and they're trying to categorize spend, through either tail spend or MMRO or things like that. And I'm just really trying to use the natural language of how somebody might enter something in an ERP, right, whenever they purchase something, and parse that out and see what they intended to do. And that's been a really big thing for me, at least as far as product development goes, to start to,
Yeah.
because I think you can't shoehorn it in. It's like every other tool. It's a technology, right? Sometimes it just doesn't fit and doesn't work. And I think a lot of people have had false starts because of that.
Mhm.
But in cases where it's just better at you than doing this, it can
Yeah.
search the web so much faster. It can do all these things. I think that's absolutely killer. Day-to-day work, I will say that if you haven't started to use ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, whatever your flavor is, in your day-to-day work, then you're really missing a huge engagement and learning opportunity, right? And I'll give you a great example. I went through and created a product definition recently,
Mhm.
and it was a typical, business case essentially for why we should invest. And here's all the market analysis and all that stuff. And then I had a second one to do. So is it more, is it better just to say, hey, ChatGPT, take this file or take all this data and now reword it so that I can, have a good starting point for product number two because it's really related, right? And that saves me so much time. And now I can start just checking my work and tweaking it to make it my own. And I think that, having that digital assistant and really digital assistant is just a very different way of paradigm work, and especially in coding, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if I don't feel like searching on Google and looking at something on Stack Overflow because I can just ask ChatGPT, hey, I need a method that does this, right?
Yeah.
So why waste my time, and I'll grab it off of there, I'll tweak it and make it my own, and then I'll say, hey, I need a test case that covers this.
Yep.
Okay, so get it out now. I've got my automation, right? So
Yep.
I think even just a practical application of enhancing you as a human to do
Yep.
work
Yep.
um, is a very big change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Speaking of, I know the founder of this company that's working on a product management automation platform. I'll tell you about it after.
Okay.
It may be something that can be really helpful. I'm still like, does it kind of like, can it really do product strategy? Can it do product vision? So I have a few thoughts in my head about that. I think I need to tinker with it a little bit more to feel more confident. But what it can absolutely do is if you give it a starting point
Mm-hmm.
and say, generate all the epics, generate all the user stories, generate test cases, acceptance criteria, all of the, sorry to say, grunt work
Right.
which you do over and over and over again. Um, I mean, I think that is pretty amazing. Like, I see it as yes, when Agile came, we defined all these special roles: product owner, product manager. What used to be like when I started, it was like inbound, outbound. We actually didn't even have that. We were like product management and marketing
Right.
squished into one. That's what I was when I started. And then we got all these definitions. Now, potentially with this automation, it's like winning the lottery for a product manager because everyone wants to do strategy work.
Right.
Now
Right.
you can do it because the grunt work is done by this tool.
Right. And
So
all you've got to do is check it. You
you
know.
have to check it. You have to verify.
Mhm.
It's almost like my cybersecurity, 10 years in cybersecurity. Check but verify. Trust
Right.
but verify.
That's right.
Right?
Never trust it. Never trust it because you don't know what it's doing. But you're right. It's just about seeding, something to make you go faster and be more efficient.
Yeah.
Um, and like I said, we're at the point in technology, career wise, that this is the learning opportunity. And I would really implore anybody that is listening to this to start using an AI companion in your day to day life. It will change everything about the way that you think about problem solving, approaching, and then you can give it the human touch, right? Because all those product owners you're talking about, I can guarantee they'd much rather be pushing product vision, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
Absolutely. Better than writing the 20th time
right.
a use case or, I mean, a user story or a test case or what have
Yep.
you. Awesome. We're almost at the end of our conversation. Before I let you go, any book recommendations? Any books that you like reading? It need not be about technology, whatever you read that
Hmm.
you'd like to share with our audience.
Well, I have a little bit of a bias on this. Um, so my daughter, I named her after the protagonist from The Golden Compass. So that's his Dark Materials series, which is kind of a personal favorite of mine, deep fantasy and things like that. So not really techie or anything like that, but I would say that that is a good one that I would recommend because obviously, like I said, I'm biased, but I really like that kind of high fantasy, multi-dimension, interdimension kind of
Yeah.
story from end to end. So if you like that kind of thing, it's an easy read. It's not something that's you have to know Shakespeare to be able to read, which is great. As opposed to Tolkien or something like that, because that to me, the Lord of the Rings is really hard to read, even though I love the story. But that's what I would say. And then I do have another one that's really good, but the title's somewhat inappropriate, so I'll tell you afterwards, and maybe you can put it in the comments. And that one is an actual work one. It's about having hard, difficult conversations, and how to enter a not a hostile but a difficult work environment and to be able to come out with a plan and to win over people. So it's a very interesting thing, and it's kind of the concept of you've got a bunch of bulls in the china shop. How are you going to calm them down and get them out the door? So, yeah, but inappropriate title, so I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay, I can't wait to hear that. Okay, awesome. So thank you, Barry. This was so much fun catching up and reminiscing. I think our audience got a lot in terms of like leadership in chaos, just AI in general, and how how it's evolved and what we need to be thinking of as product people going forward. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation. I know we talk all the time, but but I thank you for your time. I appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really, really fun. Thanks.
Thank you.